Hello, this is Pastor Steve Brown of Grace Church in Sherkston, Ontario. I'm so glad that you can join me today as I seek to give you some encouragement again during this unusual time that we are in. Today, I want to talk about patience. I don't need to tell you how tiresome we are all finding this COVID-19 thing. As I was thinking about this, I was thinking about how this social distancing and everything that goes with it is really trying my patience. But then I thought, well, maybe that's a good thing. I think most of us want more patience. The old joke is about how someone once prayed, "Lord, give me patience, and I want it right now." Well, the trouble is that God doesn't tend to zap us with patience. When we ask God for patience, He often instead lays out a curriculum to help us learn it. And that curriculum tends to consist of trials and problems and other kinds of tests. James knew this very well when he wrote his book of the Bible. From reading the book of James, we can see that his readers were suffering for their faith. They're being persecuted for believing in Jesus. He wanted to encourage them to stay true to Jesus. He didn't want them to let their trials and persecutions lead them to abandon their faith. He wanted them to be people who bear the trials of this life without losing their faith in God in the process. So in chapter 5, he writes a few things to encourage them to continue on in their faith despite the problems and trials and discomfort that they were experiencing because of it. So let's look at what he says. First of all, he tells them to remember that patience produces a payoff. He writes in verse 7, "Be patient then, my brothers, until the Lord's coming. See how the farmer waits for the land to yield its valuable crop, and how patient he is for the autumn and the spring rains. You too be patient and stand firm, because the Lord's coming is near." So in this case, James was reminding them that rewards come to people who wait. Just like farmers must be patient if they're going to enjoy the rewards of a crop at harvest time, followers of Christ must be patient if they're going to enjoy the rewards that come when Jesus comes back again to rule and reign. Being patient in difficult times does lead to a reward, a heavenly one for sure, but it also leads to a reward we can enjoy in this world, one of which is greater patience. Again, God doesn't tend to zap us with patience. He brings us through trials and tests to strengthen and teach us patience. We eventually find that things we had trouble enduring in the past are now a lot more easily borne. Now, I don't appreciate rude gestures in traffic. I don't think any of us do, especially if we don't think that they were deserved. Well, that happened to me in Port Colborne a couple of months ago, where someone gave me a rude gesture that I didn't think I deserved. Years ago, that would have made me mad. But you know, this time, I kind of found it funny. And I kind of thought, you know, buddy, you just said so much about yourself by doing that. Not about me, but about yourself. And I actually laughed a little bit to myself about it. I was kind of surprised that I didn't get angry, I suppose. But you know, God has been working on me for years and years. And it's like the story of a woman who heard the famous violinist Fritz Kreisler, and after the concert was over, she went up to Kreisler and she said, "I would give my life to be able to play the violin as beautifully as you play it." And Fritz Kreisler just simply looked at her and said, "I did. I did." Patience does produce a payoff. But then James not only tells them there's rewards for those who develop patience under the direction of God, but there's a consequence for impatience. It says in verse 9, don't grumble against each other, brothers, or you will be judged. The judge is standing at the door. See, a characteristic of impatient people is that they complain or grumble. You've all seen it. You've been in the grocery store and the person behind you is grumbling at how long the line is, or you've been in the airport and you've heard people grumble when the flight is delayed or whatever. Impatient people tend to complain or grumble. But notice how James warns his readers not to do that against each other, or they will be swiftly judged by God. James encourages his readers to patience by reminding them that there are consequences to impatience. Now, James is talking about being judged by God for impatience, which we normally associate with something that happens after we die. However, there are consequences to impatience even during this life. I just read an article from a website called Exploring Your Mind, which talks about the consequences of impatience, which include complicating your life, high blood pressure, obesity, and even premature aging. Impatience has its own rewards, and we won't like them. But lastly, James tells us that patient people see God work and experience his work in their lives, especially his love and compassion. We read in verse 10, brothers, as an example of patience in the face of suffering, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. As you know, we consider blessed those who have persevered. You have heard of Job's perseverance and have seen what the Lord finally brought about. The Lord is full of compassion and mercy. So it's patient people, not impatient ones, who will see what God will bring about in their lives. In the case of Job, he ended up wealthier and much better off and more prosperous than he was before God allowed him to lose everything. But Job wouldn't have experienced that if he had lost his faith in God. It's when we are patient that we see God work in our lives. It's when we are patient that we end up experiencing God's compassion and mercy on us in a very real, personal, and profound way. It's like the old illustration of how our lives are like a tapestry. If you've ever seen the backside of a tapestry, you know how it's not very beautiful. It just looks like a bunch of tangled knots with no rhyme or reason to them. But when you look at the other side of the tapestry, that's when you see the beauty. And that's a lot like our lives. We get to see the backside of our lives, but if we're patient, we eventually will see the beauty that God has worked in the tapestry of our lives. But again, God uses trials and problems, like the ones we are now experiencing, to build patience into our lives by the Holy Spirit. However, if we don't submit to God's lessons, we will be prone to bitterness rather than patience. We won't see the payoff of patience. Rather, we will reap the consequences of impatience. But if we submit to God's lessons, we will experience God's wonderful work in our lives, especially that of his compassion and mercy. So, my friends, may you look back at this time and be able to celebrate how God used it to build patience into your life. Well, thank you for joining me. I hope you can join me tomorrow night at 7 o'clock as we live stream a Good Friday service for you. Again, for those of you who are part of Grace Church and are on our database, I'll send you out an email that has the link to the live stream. And you can click on it around 7 o'clock and you will see us as we broadcast the service. If you're not on that, we'll just simply come on to our YouTube channel about that time and you will see where you can click on the live stream. If you are wondering how you can support the work of Grace Church during this time, well, we are still working on electronic ways to give, but until then, you can either drop off your tithe or offering or mail it to us, and we would be happy to deal with it that way. Well, you all have a wonderful holiday weekend. I hope to see you here tomorrow night. May God bless you.